This, I think, is what was so useful as we set up and as we moved into really from the geological world to the biological world, looking at the sheer complexity of it. The biology really does not have any way to talk about time. It really is the rocks that give us that, even though they will talk about the fossils in the rocks, and sometimes that's kind of a curious circle of, was it the fossils or is it the radioisotopes that are telling us what's really the time is here? But that aside, inside the life, we move from the complexity of life, we find the design in life, and then we move actually to the creatures. I think Todd Wood did a great job at the zoo showing us in these creatures this multi-tool, this idea that in the lion you've got many creatures. And he even talked about the tiger and the lion making a liger. These new creatures that can be, which is 50% larger than either. So let's just talk for a second that creationists had adopted the Aristotelian view of the fixity of species. Yeah. And I think that the tendency for Christians to adopt other views and not be willing to say, well, maybe this is kind of much more complex than I realize. Maybe, and I think that's where Charles Darwin said, he said, I'm seeing some changes here in breeds. Well, let's extrapolate that back. In some cases, he was more accurate to the creation than someone who was holding to the fixity of species. And I think that's a fair thing to say. So the key is that even that doesn't go far enough. Really, when you say, well, they don't jump, but man, within the species, or at least created kinds, you can have some radically different body morphologies and changes. We saw dogs, as we see with cats, as we see with bears and horses. And I just think it's important for us to realize that there's this idea of embedded change and embedded consistency and how these things work together, the continuity and the discontinuity between them. Well, I will say this, the section though that I feel like we didn't get into as well enough as we could, and I wish we could have, was talking about the hominid record. And Todd will bring this up, Australopiths, the southern apes is how it's translated. What are these? They're very strange. Questions about, which you don't get into it, the foramen magnum and where that sits. But they're small and they're very weird and they look like they actually could have been in trees, and you look at the way their legs are bowed and for some of them and the varieties of them, let's just say mysterious and strange. Clearly not human, but clearly some strange creatures out there. Yeah. And yet you can look and see even recently the discovery of the skulls in the Damascene cave there in Georgia, which has 6 different skulls all in the same cave from clearly, they were all buried together from supposedly, hominids that lived at different times, and yet there they are together. And so I feel like the need to have a certain plastic view of this, of like, so what is this really? What's really going on when those people got off the ark? What did they look like? What did they do? And those animals that were on the ark, what were they and what did they do? I don't think we know completely. And I think there's a lot of work that goes back to that work that needs to be done in the tertiary and quaternary. What really happened? And this is a mystery that I think is real. We can know that it's very clear these are created kinds, but there's some weirdness to what we're finding, even in other mammals, very curious mammals in the fossil record.
Well, these are the areas that, again, all of these scientists admitted, and I think rightfully so, that there are a lot of things that we don't know yet. And I see that, and my mind immediately goes to point to the young people and say, what a frontier for you. There are so many areas that need to be studied. The creation, the modern work in creation scientists is young. We need people who have been gifted in these different areas to join, these rogue scientists,
that's right.
as I call them, to join them and to carry on that work. There's fascinating areas that we need to study and look at.
Well, and I think that to me, another important aspect of this, because speaking about young people, is the idea that they will see one data point and suddenly say, well, that disproves the whole thing. And I think that's a key aspect on both sides. Anyone does this. Because we've been geared to that science can prove things. And science cannot prove anything. The idea of proof is you can do that in geometry if you want to do a proof. And I think that's the aspect here, is that if you don't realize that science is working within paradigms to present data that fits a certain theory, but that's often displaced by others, this is not an ultimate authority. It's an authority of sorts, but not ultimate. That we have to go to other things as our authority. And for us, the scripture is that authority as a telling of historical events.
Right.
So it's not one to be reconstructed. And so when you have things that don't quite seem to fit, often it's because, well, I think it's going to take some time to understand and get more data and see where it fits, because there are so many other things that do fit. And because so many of the things that Jesus said and Paul said, things that we know can easily be triangulated toward things that we know less of.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where we realize it's not that we don't find our faith, we don't find our authority on the data points. They're not reasons to believe. To be quite honest, you can't use science that way.
And it takes it back again to the understanding of the history of science.